Has there been a time in your life you didn't want to accept devastation? I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and thanks for listening to the Parable Podcast. Today, we are collaborating again with the Baton Pass. If you haven't heard about the Baton Pass before, they exist to empower overcomers to share their stories in a powerful way that brings hope, healing, and radical restoration. This mission really connects to what the Parable Podcast is all about, is that our stories matter. And for the past few years, I've hosted some of their events. I'm on their leadership team, and I have seen the impact of what is happening in the hearts of so many women. Joining me today is the owner of The Gathering Place, Janelle Hermann, who shares about what happens when we don't get the desires of our heart.
Like when God doesn't give you those things, He's got other reasons. And it's hard to understand that because at the time you're like, oh, but I really want kids. Like, this is like what I'm called to do.
Here's my conversation with Janelle Hermann. Well, my first job right out of college was working at the Brookfield Zoo. I was an events coordinator. So anytime I think of events, I think about J-Lo and the wedding planner. And that was like the goal, the dream I had in my life. So events always have like a sweet spot in my heart. And Janelle, when I walked into your space, even actually driving up to the Gathering Place, I just felt like at peace. It was like so beautiful, so special. I'm just excited to hear more about your place today.
That's awesome. Thank you. It's kind of a crazy story to see like how God is using that place and all the things that He's doing and like how it's all connected to everything that my husband and I have been through.
Yeah. Okay. So Janelle, she owns with her husband, it's called The Gathering Place and it's in Central Illinois. How long has the place been open?
So we've been doing events for about a year and a half.
Okay.
Let's see. It was November of 22. I think that we finished it. We finished it in time for my nephew's birthday party. And then we didn't start booking until April of 23.
Yeah.
So it's been a little over a year and a half.
Yeah. Has your background ever been in like hospitality? Has this been like a dream or was this born out of something else? You're like, you know what? Let's try this.
Well, I was a teacher for 20 years.
Okay.
So I feel like one of my gifts is helping people and providing things for other people. I'm a giver, but I felt like I could do that in the teaching environment. I always envisioned my life as I would be teaching until retirement. I retired at the end of last year. So I did that to kind of go into the Gathering Place and working with brides and people of all different things there and different events. Yeah, so I guess I never really kind of envisioned myself going in this direction.
There's so many times we have this like idea of, oh, this is how our life looks or what I envision my life to look like. And we kind of hand that over to God, but maybe we're just like really holding on to it really tight. And then, like, you know, we just have to let go and see where God takes us. And that's really scary at sometimes because you're wondering, you're like, is this my purpose? I thought this was the direction I was going to go. I would be curious to know, like, what has been like a joy that has come out of this space for you? Because you guys host like so many weddings and like special events for people's lives. So what has really given back to you?
Well, a couple things come to mind. We just had our church does their baptisms out in the pond.
That's lovely.
And, you know, you always remember where you got baptized. So, you know, it's a big emotional thing for me because that's a big step. And then it's happening at our place. And then also, you know, when brides come through, when they walk through, I want them to know that, like, if they book with us, that I'm praying for you because you're making a really big commitment at our building. And I don't take that lightly. My vision for the office is to have pictures of each bride and groom on a wall. And that way I have a prayer wall and I can pray for them because, you know, marriage is a important thing to me. My husband and I went through a lot with our marriage. Most people do, but I really see that as something that it's serious. And I want, you know, my brides and grooms to know that I take that seriously. Like it's a promise and it's not just to each other, but it's to everybody else. And then, you know, I'm providing the space. So that's a joy for me.
as anyone learns in their job or even in their own business, like there's just things that like come at us. You're like, whoa, I never expected that. Or I would have never dreamed this would have ever happened. Has there anything been like something funny that has happened at one of your events? You're just like, wow, didn't expect that.
Yeah. I mean, it was a wedding. We had someone puke in the bathroom.
Oh gosh. Oh, yeah. Didn't know that you were also a janitor at the same time. Yeah.
Fortunately, I have a great clean lady. I apologized to them. I was like, I got to clean up as much as I could. But
oh my goodness. All right. So Janelle, the way that we were connected was the Baton Pass, who is helping collaborate this episode. And the Baton Pass is just like an awesome community of women, like an organization that really empowers women to know that they're not alone, that there is a safe place for stories to be shared. So we had our beautiful Central Illinois event at your gathering place. And it was really, it was such a special day. I think there was such energy. And I think that comes from how you want this to be just as special as how the person who's having an event feels.
For sure.
And you were there, like you were present. It wasn't like, okay, great. Here's the keys. I'll see you in 5 hours. Like you were at the event. You were helping us like get everything ready. And you were so excited. So I know that the Baton Pass is new to Central Illinois. So what connected with you that you're like, oh, yeah, I'd actually like to come to this event?
I wish that when I was going through all the things that I went through in the past several years, I wish that I had something like that to go to. And I wish I had heard other people's stories because I think it would have really helped. Yeah. It would have just helped me feel like I'm not alone. You know, a lot of infertility is you feel alone. I don't know if things would be different, but I see the impact of stories. And it's really kind of crazy how Kelly got a hold of me because I was in the airport that day when she called and we were traveling, and I don't normally answer phone calls when I'm traveling, but I sent it to voicemail. I was like, oh, Chicago. And I listened to her message and I was like, I feel like I need to call her back. And so I did in the airport, and I told her, I was like, I'm sorry if things are really loud, but I really felt like I needed to call you back. And the connection, like everything that she was saying, just really aligned with, you know, everything that we believe. And I guess I've kind of been praying for direction in my life. And I can see how God is kind of steering me in these ways of, let's use your building for these things. And I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that to facilitate for the direction that I'm sending you.
Absolutely. I know that you like had that feeling. There was a connection. You're excited about the event, but you still brought like a whole group of women with you. So I'd be curious to know, like, what was that invitation? Like, obviously it helps to have a relationship, but you're just like, listen, we have this event. I don't necessarily know what's it going to be about, but I'd like you to come. So what was that like rolling through your head? Was that easy for you? Was that challenging?
No, I just sent out invites. I mean, like, I'm good friends with our secretary at our church. And so I told her, I was like, hey, put this out in the church announcements. And they announced it. And now for this time, I'm going to change up the announcements a little bit. I think I'm going to offer to do the announcement at church so they know exactly what it is and people feel like they can be included. But yeah, I know a lot of my friends, you know, in the 40s, we're all going through something and it's all different things, which is crazy. Yeah. And so I was just sending out these invites to all these people who I was like, oh, well, even if you're not going through things, this might be something that you can come to not be a church event, not feel like you have to be in a church or perform a certain way or wear certain clothes. And, you know, there are people in our community that don't go to church because they feel like they're being judged.
Yeah.
And so
I agree with that. And I also think isolation is so huge. While we can have friends, we can see people at events, at church, there is this internal isolation that makes us feel, and I do feel like this is like a tactic of the enemy, is that, oh, you're the only one that's going through this. I bet you're the only one that's feeling that. I was just talking with a woman the other day. She's like my mom's age. She's older than my mom. And still, like, she is struggling because of her current season. And gosh, it's just like places like the Baton Pass where women can feel seen when you hear somebody else's story and you're just like, thank you. Like, it's not exactly the same, but it makes me understand, like, okay, there is hope in this situation. Well, Janelle, I would love to hear about how all of this connects to the gathering place. So please tell us, what is your parable story today?
To kind of like preface this, my best friend has been doing the Bible recap. And growing up, I grew up Pentecostal. So it was more like it wasn't terrible, not in any way, but it was more like, these are the things that you do and these are the things that you don't do. And it might have been my age too, but I never felt like that I could read and understand the Bible. And so when my best friend told me that she was going through the Bible recap, I was like, oh, that's cool. Well, then I was, grocery shopping in Sam's Club one day, and that big table, there was the Bible recap book. And I'm a book person. I was a reading specialist for 12 years. And I saw that and I was like, but I should buy that. And so I put it in my cart and took it home. And so I've been going through it, and it has really helped me understand like the backstory for all the things. So as I was praying about doing this podcast with you, I was like, okay, what would my parable be? And I've been praying about that for several days. And then it jumped out at me as I was reading through this Bible recap when it talked about Job and how God allowed Satan to come into his life and make it awful.
Yeah.
I mean, there was like some bad things that really happened to him. And God said, no, the only thing you can't do is you can't kill him. Mm-hmm. Well, then by the end of that, Job was like, all I want to be is dead. And I was like, man, I can so identify with that, because the beating that you take as you're going through these things, like you feel low enough where you're just like, I don't want to be alive. I struggled with that. So as I was reading through this Bible recap, I came across something and I was like, that's my parable. And I'm going to read this to you. It was when it says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. It's Job 1:21. And from that, I felt like even though we go through these really hard things and God might allow Satan to do these things like he did with Job, but in the end, God has the final word. Mm-hmm. And that is what like really kind of takes everything that I've gone through in a nutshell and sums it up. God has the final word. He's in complete control. Mm-hmm. And so I guess back in 2012, my husband and I went through, I was pregnant. Mm-hmm. And then not much longer after that, we took a trip to Costa Rica. I think it was 8 weeks. We were with another couple, other friend that was with me. She was a nurse. Looking back now, I can say, okay, God put her there for a reason. Yeah. And I started cramping and bleeding while we were down there. I remember at one point being like, my husband, Brett, was saying, we need you at the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so we went to a Costa Rican hospital, which, it was not, it's what you see in the movies. It's awful. And I remember looking at Jenny, my friend, and saying, just make sure that whatever they put in me is clean. And she was like, okay. And she kind of stuck with me and Brett stuck with me. But coming out of that, I was taken to a room and they did a sonogram and I had a heartbeat. So in my mind, and it had taken us a while to get pregnant. We got married in 2008. So this 4 years later. In my mind, everything was okay because I'd heard a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. They discharged me after a while and we went back to the hotel. And I went to bed that night and I remember feeling queasy, crampy. I got up in the middle of the night with some really, really bad cramps. And I went to the bathroom and Jenny had put I think it was a bag, like a plastic bag in the toilet so she could monitor how much I was bleeding. I took that out of the toilet that night, and I'm glad I did because that was when I miscarried. And I think the hardest thing for me to deal with or for a long time for me to accept was that my baby was in the toilet in Costa Rica. Yeah. It wasn't even like a proper burial. Mm-hmm. So from that, I'm sorry. Okay. I didn't actually realize that I had miscarried at that point. Again, in my mind, I had a heartbeat. So then the next day, I think I slept and it was towards the end of our trip. Then on Saturday, we were getting ready to head home. And that morning, I do remember this. We were sitting at the breakfast table and I was like, oh, I can eat. And I had been really sick the entire time with food. And I just said that, oh, I can eat. I'm not nauseous with food. Didn't even occur to me what happened. I don't know if the people around me knew, like if Brett knew or if my friends knew, I don't know. But we got on a plane, we headed home, and I had a doctor's appointment that Monday. And that was really hard because the doctor came in and told me, well, you're not pregnant anymore. And that was the biggest devastation of my entire life, just because I didn't want to accept it. I didn't see it coming. It was really devastating. So from there, I'm going to have to look at my notes because after that, I don't really remember. So after that, I mean, I kind of just functioned and I got through daily life. I went to school, whatever, and I slowly slipped into some depression. I don't think I realized it at the point. I felt pretty alone. And, I felt like no one understood me. I was angry. I was angry at God. And then in January of 2014, so a couple of years later, my grandpa passed away and I was really close with him. And it was a sudden thing. We didn't ever have any answers, which was really weird. Like my grandma didn't do anything to figure it out. But losing him was another thing that just kind of set me back just because it was so unexpected. And then shortly after that, I got pregnant again on our own. We went through several treatments of IVF and some IUI stuff, but we got pregnant again in 2014 without any help. And I remember feeling completely devastated, like really upset that I was actually pregnant. And maybe upset's not the word. Maybe I was scared. I was scared because I didn't want to go through that again. I didn't feel like I could handle that. I hadn't really, even in those, 2 years, I don't feel like I had recovered. I also didn't feel like I had a relationship with God. So, again, I was completely alone. There were several times that my friends would try to help or they would try to be there for me. And I'm pretty sure I just, pushed them all away. But it was also at the time where they were all having kids. Yeah. And that was really hard for me, but I couldn't communicate that with them at the point. To me, it just turned into anger. Yeah. I was angry that I couldn't have kids. I was angry that, that I was pregnant again because in my mind automatically goes to what happened before. Long story short, I miscarried again. This time it was at home. All the symptoms, same symptoms. It was crazy. I called my doctor and I just said, I am pretty sure that I felt something was wrong and they didn't listen to me. And I just said, it's the exact same thing as last time. I'm pretty sure I have an autoimmune disease that fights what's inside of you and it attacks it. But they didn't listen. They said, well, if you're not bleeding this much, then you don't really need to come in. And I was like, okay, well, I trust the doctors. What do you do? So that ended up happening. And then it kind of just pushed me back even more. I didn't do anything to help myself. I didn't really know that I needed to, go see a counselor or things like that. Now I know that I had PTSD. Now coming back, I went through help, but it took Brett telling me, hey, if you don't get help, then our marriage is over. And he had to say that in order to get me off the couch and go do something. I was also putting all these limitations on a counselor and saying, okay, well, has to have this criteria, like she can't have kids. She has to be able to, work with people with infertility. Oh, completely ridiculous limitations on that. Looking back now, it's like, oh, well, hurt is hurt. And no matter what that looks like, it still feels the same. So I found a really good counselor. Her name was Dawn Smith, and she is in Morton, which is like an hour and a half drive. But I drove there like twice a week. But she was like, I think we need to work on your identity first. Because a part of that was me feeling like I wasn't meeting up to a certain standard. Like I couldn't have kids. And so what was my worth in this world? Because God created women to have babies, right? Yeah. So I dealt with that a lot. She helped me through that. She helped me in communicating with Brett because him and I were not in a good spot at all. And so then after that, after I kind of graduated from that, she recommended me to a new counselor for some PTSD therapy. And that was really hard.
Yeah, I bet.
To go through all of that. It's the eye movement.
The EMDR. Yeah.
And that helped me really file. The way that she explained it was I am filing things correctly in my brain. It's helping take all that like fog, that brain fog, and filing everything correctly in my brain so that I can make sense of things. And it really helped. Good. It really helped. And then, Brett and I we tried to do some marriage counseling. That didn't really work for us. So we kind of did it ourselves. And it worked. We just, spent time. But like the hardest thing, I think, for me was what happens in our life when we don't get the desires of our heart. Like when God doesn't give you those things, he's got other reasons. And it's hard to understand that because at the time you're like, oh, but I really want kids. Like, this is what I'm called to do. And, this is why God created me. But it's almost like a mind shift. You have to shift your mind into thinking, I want kids. Do I need them? Is my identity in that? No, my identity is in Christ. He's the one that's sustaining us. Not kids are not going to fulfill me. So it's really like I've come a long way with coping with that. And Brett and I have both been at the point where we're like, we need to make new memories for ourselves and move forward instead of looking back on things that we think we should have. That's helped a lot.
Well, Janelle, thank you just for walking us through a very difficult journey that you've been. Eric and I have experienced miscarriage as well. And it's hard because you have that, you had mentioned that, like you feel the heartbeat, you know that the heartbeat is there. And then within hours, it's gone. And so how do you deal with that devastation? Something that sometimes you physically cannot even control. Like it's just this loss, and also something like a child you've never seen, and just reconciling with that is a lot. It is trauma. You talked about like when you were first talking about your faith as a child, it's like the do's and the don'ts, and how that counselor kind of helped you figure out your identity. I think the same is for women. Like, well, this is what women do and this is what women don't do, to reset that framework, to know like who is our identity in Christ. What were some of those like other barriers of identity that you had to like break through? And obviously it was challenging, but maybe like something that like popped up during that time of figuring out who you are that really helped you kind of break through and realize that you are a daughter of God.
Yeah. So I think that my identity in my marriage was the big thing. Yeah. I never saw my parents fight.
Okay.
So I think they had the best intentions, trying to not bring that in. But that has also been hard for me because I didn't ever know how to handle conflict. Yeah. So who I am in my marriage, too, is something that I've had to deal with. And the person that I am now is not the same person that he married 16 years ago. I'm sure we all go through that. But yeah, I think that's another thing that came up, realizing who I am in my marriage, that I'm an equal. It's a partnership. It's not something where I should feel like I have to be this certain person or do this certain things because I think that makes Brett happy. Yeah. That was a big thing also. And a part of this is figuring out who we are together, not just my identity, but how does this change us? Because he has a big part in it too. And, throughout the whole thing, I was a very selfish person. I didn't ever ask him how he felt. And I'm not sure that I could because of how deeply depressed I was. When I sit with people and try to help people, I try to have them think about the other person too, because they're part of it.
You had said like you didn't want to accept devastation, and both miscarriages. It is a feeling of just complete, like ripped away, like your heart is ripped out. And you said that you didn't get the desires of your heart. Talk to me a little bit about processing through, because you've gone through the devastation. There will be devastation again in your life, no matter what it is. How do we process that and move on, knowing that God's intention, he's still a good God. He's not out to get Janelle. How do we work through that?
I think that having faith is a big part of it. Having faith in God that he really is not out to get us, that he does have our best intentions in mind. And you have to shift your mind. I think that a lot of times we have this vision of how we want things to go, and we have to be flexible. And then, also this is where trust comes in. Like, we have to trust that God has amazing things for us, something even better. And, after all of this stuff happened, I was really thankful that I still had my students. I still had my kids. when people would ask me how many, like, oh, that's the worst question, is how many do you have kids? Yeah. And I'm like, well, how do I answer that? Do I say, yeah, I have 2, but they're not on this earth? Sometimes I say that. Sometimes I say, oh, I have 18. And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, my students, So I was really thankful for my students at that time. Like, I think that was something that I was able to lean on and help me feel fulfilled in that area a little bit more than maybe if I didn't. But and I feel like maybe it might be different for everyone. Like, depending on how you deal with trauma. If you talk to my husband, this went over years and years and years and years. Like, it was not a quick process. I know the story today is quick because of time constraints, but like, getting help and going through that process takes years. It is not. And I am just so thankful that he stood by me. And, I feel very blessed to have a husband that stood by me, that wanted to work through things, that, was like, okay, well, this isn't who you are. Yeah. I'm not blaming you for not being a mom. Never once did he say that. He never said, I'm leaving you because you can't have my kid. Never once. And I also feel like that God says that too. God says, I'm not going to leave you. You are my child. I created you for a purpose, and I'm guiding you to that purpose. This door might be closed, but check out this door over here. Yeah. I think it's all about being able to have some sight and looking ahead. I wouldn't say that I'm a person that can see the big picture all the time. I tend to look at the little things, the little steps as we go. But that's why I married my opposite, is because he can see the big picture a lot of times, and he has a different perspective. And so when I'm dealing with something or feeling a certain way, Brett has really helped me, see the big picture. Oh, well, we can't do this. Well, let's try this.
That's good. You said when you first got back from Costa Rica, you just went back into teaching. You just got through daily life. You found yourself just laying on the couch. I'm sure not even fully processing what was happening. And even in the beginning of our interview, you had talked about I wish that there were people that I could have talked to, I could understand, process through, had a community. Now that you've gone through it, what does community mean to you, to have that place where you can talk to those brides, you can talk to your friends who are walking through something that maybe you've already experienced? How has that played a role in this whole parable story?
That's a huge role, because I think that God is calling me out of all of this. Yeah, I guess I'd originally thought that, God is teaching me how to handle future trauma. Well, yes, I think, but there's also a bigger picture here. I think that he is showing me how to have patience and how to have compassion for other people that are going through things, and just to sit and just to be there with them instead of providing all this advice. I think that when we can do that, I think that speaks more loudly than words. Sometimes when people are going through something and you're like, oh, I don't know what to say. Well, sometimes nothing is best. And I did have a tribe of people behind me. Yeah. I didn't realize it at the time. My friends were there. I pushed them away. But when I was ready, they were right there. I mean, they didn't shun me because, I was absent for a few years, but they forgave me for treating them unkindly. And my family was too. And Brett's family was too. They gave me a lot of grace.
Janelle, you had mentioned that it was just really hard to feel like God was with you in this whole situation. But through that, I think now looking back, you can see all those places and spaces that he was at. And I just think even you said your friend was a nurse, that she was with you, and finding these different counselors and getting the help that you need. We just don't really see it when we're in the thick of it. It's kind of that dark sky, and you're just but there are just this little, if you just see that tiny pinprick of a star, you just know at least this is the way that I have to keep going. The upcoming events for the Baton Pass, our theme is called Brave Enough. And, if there is a woman out there who has experienced child loss, infertility, struggling with just like, what is my identity right now? Maybe they're on like, should I go to counseling? Like, is this really for me? Do I really need this? How would you encourage her just to have the courage just to take that first step?
I would say that you need to find someone first that you can confide in, and you need to be able to tell them the whole truth. Yeah. After that, then, seeking counseling, I think it's okay to have criteria of what you look for in a counselor. I am very thankful that I had a Christian counselor. I think that made all the world of a difference too. But just to have that one person that is not in a situation that can be a sounding board for you, but still in your corner, and they're neutral, but they're still in your corner, is really huge. But the only way that it'll work is if you are completely honest. Because I don't think you can work through things if you don't recognize them. I shared my story at another event that we had out of the gathering place with my friend Nicole, and she asked me to speak at this event, and I was like, oh, this is the first time I've shared my story publicly, and it was really scary, but from that, I had several women that came and talked to me afterwards, and just to know that someone else is going through similar things that you are, and can be like, oh, I totally get that. Like, I get what you're feeling. I get what you're saying. Like, yes, that's me. And I know God's calling me to do something like that. I just don't know what.
Yeah. And I think that's okay. I think sometimes it is just, he's like, Janelle, I'm just asking you to share your story once. Like, do you have that obedience to just share it? Because you just don't know like who is there. I think that's like the crazy thing about the Baton Pass. Like sometimes we don't know who's at these events, what they're bringing to the table that day, but there's something that sparks, and that I truly believe that's hope, to know that one, they're not alone, that God is with you, even when you can't see him. So Janelle, thank you so much, really, for sharing authentically. I know that this is an easy story to share, but just grateful that you are stepping out and expressing like how God has been good. And even when we don't want to accept devastation, we don't understand why things are happening in our life, like he is still with us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And to remember that he has the ultimate say at the end, like he is in control even when things go bad. Like he's got the ending already figured out. And that's another thing, like this whole thing wasn't a surprise to God. He knew. At my most devastating moments, he knew. Like God's not surprised by anything. I want to share this one quote with you. I got into a lot of like holistic health things because I felt like that was all I could control. So I attended a conference for Juice Plus, and they had this man. He was a pastor. His name is Ike Reigard, Reighard. And he was sharing his life story. You should look up his life story sometime because it is like, it'll make you cry. But one thing that he said that really resounded with me was he said, live your life story now the way you want to tell it later. And I was like, oh gosh, why didn't I hear that earlier? Like, I feel like maybe I wouldn't have heard it during that time. But like moving forward, that gives me such hope. So like when you said like, what would you say to someone who's going through stuff? I would say live your life now the way that you want to tell it later, because that sets you up for being okay with whatever God has planned for you.
Janelle, if people wanted to connect with you or learn more about the Gathering Place, what's the best ways that they can do that?
If you're wanting to do like business, you can go to our website. It's thegatheringplaceil.com and fill out a submit form. And that directly emails me so that I can see if you're wanting to do an event. It also gives me all the details. But if you want to connect with me and you're in a similar situation, I would be glad to talk to you. You can email me at Janelle@frontierfarms.com, or I'm also on social media, so you can find me, Janelle Hermann.
All of Janelle's information will be in today's show notes. And Janelle, I'm so excited to see you again for the upcoming fall event. If you want to join us in Central Illinois, otherwise there's an event in Chicago and Arizona, and all just awesome events happening all the time with the Baton Pass. We'd love to see you there. Janelle, thank you so much much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me on, and I'm excited to see what comes around from the next Baton Pass event.
I know for me, that conversation with Janelle was comforting, but it also brought up some memories that I have walked through in the past as well. Eric and I had a miscarriage, and it is really hard to kind of process through, but also see God's goodness through those spaces of our life. If you are walking through a journey right now where you are facing devastation, I highly encourage you that this is the time to reach out to a safe person and just to share your story. I'm grateful to partner with the Baton Pass for a few episodes and encourage women who have been brave enough, who stepped out, or maybe you're just finding the courage today. We'd love to see you at the Central Illinois event on November 10th. Janelle will be there. Obviously, it's her place that we're going to be hanging out at, and I will be there. We will be so excited to see you if you could join us and if you're in that area. To connect with Janelle or the Baton Pass, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Janelle today. Number 1, sometimes our identity can get wrapped up into the do's and the don'ts. And what are a few of those unsaid things in your life that it's maybe time to let go of? Number 2, the desires of your heart matter to God, but how can you release them to Him and seek His understanding and find Him as a place of comfort? If you're looking for more information on the Baton Pass, or you want to hear more stories from the women that we have already recorded with, we have a whole list available. They'll be in the show notes, and also there is a special playlist on YouTube, so be sure to check that out. Also, a huge shout out to my gifted husband, Eric, for his editing expertise. That's going to do it for today. I'm grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your parable, it showcases how God uses your devastation for something so much more. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.